Welcome to Firstpost America, everyone. I'm Eric Ham, and we're live in the nation's capital of Washington, D.C. And today on the program, we look at continued fighting between the Iran-backed Houthis, Israel, and the United States. Meanwhile, Elon Musk's Starlink satellite hits a snag in Italy. Those and other stories coming up, but first, we get you caught up on the latest headlines. Venezuela receives nearly 200 citizens deported from the United States after Washington and Caracas reach an agreement to resume repatriation flights. Israel launches new strikes across the Gaza Strip, killing at least 25 people a week after negotiations broke down with Hamas over the release of the remaining hostages. Turkey's main opposition names former Istanbul mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu as a presidential candidate for 2028's general election as protests continue over his arrest last week. South Korea deploys dozens of helicopters and thousands of firefighters and soldiers as it struggles to battle more than 20 wildfires in the southeast. And Apple announces a new clean energy fund in China worth over $99 million. The announcement coincides with Apple CEO Tim Cook's visit to Beijing. We began in the Middle East, where tensions continue to escalate as the Houthis of Yemen launched a fresh wave of attacks against Israel and the United States. On Sunday, the Houthis claimed responsibility for targeting the Ben Gurion airport near Tel Aviv with a hypersonic ballistic missile. A Houthi military spokesperson in a televised speech announced that the attack briefly disrupted air traffic at the airport. However, Israeli military reported that their air defense systems intercepted the missile before it crossed into Israeli airspace.
The missile force of the Yemeni armed forces targeted Ben Gurion Airport in the occupied Jaffa area with a Palestine II hypersonic ballistic missile. The operation successfully achieved its objective by the grace of God, which led to the suspension of air traffic at the airport for more than half an hour.
Meanwhile, the Houthis also declared that they had engaged American forces in the Red Sea, specifically targeting the USS Harry S. Truman aircraft carrier and other U.S. warships with missiles and drones. Now, in response to the Houthis' attack, Washington also intensified its air campaign against Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen. Reports indicate that multiple U.S. airstrikes hit the Yemen airport, a coastal area near the Red Sea, and parts of the Sana'a province, which are key Houthi strongholds. The attack in the capital killed at least one person and wounded more than a dozen others.
The Israeli and American enemy targeted a civilian site that was uninhabited and still under construction, resulting in 4 injuries from people passing by, evacuated to the hospital. And until now, there are 5 injured that have been treated at Ibn Sina Hospital, and 13 others have been evacuated to Al Jamhuriya Hospital.
Now, the conflict between the United States forces and the Houthis have significantly impacted global shipping. In fact, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz revealed that the U.S. flagships are now avoiding the Red Sea due to security risk. Rather, they're now opting for a much longer and costlier route around Africa's southern tip.
75% of our U.S. flag shipping now has to go around the southern coast of Africa rather than going through the Suez Canal. The last time one of our destroyers went through the straits there, it was attacked 23 times.
Meanwhile, political discussions on the crisis have intensified. Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke along with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Sunday and reaffirmed Washington's commitment to protecting Red Sea shipping routes and supporting Israel's ongoing military operations in Gaza. As the situation remains volatile, both sides are locked in an ongoing cycle of attacks and counterattacks. And as tensions rise, one critical question remains: how far, in fact, will this conflict escalate before it reaches a breaking point? And back here in Washington, President Donald Trump says he's the only person in the world who can end the war in Ukraine. In a recent interview, President Trump said there's nobody who can stop Russian President Vladimir Putin except him. The commander-in-chief added he's had some very rational discussions with Putin to halt the bloodshed. Now, these comments come just hours after his special envoy Steve Witkoff described Putin as a great leader and not, quote-unquote, a bad guy. Witkoff separately said the Russian invasion would not go beyond Ukraine, as Putin only wants lasting peace.
I just don't see that he wants to take all of Europe. This is a much different situation than it was in World War II. In World War II, there was no NATO. You have countries that are armed there. To me, it just does. I take him at his word in this sense. I feel that he wants peace. The president had 2 very productive calls this week, or last week, I should say. One with President Zelensky, one with President Putin. I sat and listened to both of them. In both conversations, it was all about a lasting peace.
Last week, President Trump held talks with the Russian leader and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky separately. During their conversation, Putin rejected a complete ceasefire but agreed to halt attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure for 30 days. However, soon after, Russian drones attacked Ukrainian power facilities, and the assault has been ongoing for the past few days. Now, over the weekend, Russian strikes killed at least 3 people in Kyiv after hitting residential buildings and causing a huge blaze. Meanwhile, on Sunday, officials from the United States and Ukraine held a second round of ceasefire talks in Riyadh, which the Ukrainian leader described as productive.
Today marks the second meeting between the Ukrainian and U.S. teams in Saudi Arabia. This time, at a more technical level, our military, our diplomats, and our representatives from the Ministry of Energy. I just spoke with Rustam Umarov. He briefed me on the meeting and the course of the negotiations. Our team is working in a completely constructive manner. The conversation is quite useful. The work of the delegations is continuing.
President Zelensky has also urged his Russian counterpart to halt the 3-year invasion.
But no matter what we discuss with our partners now, we need to get Putin to give a real order to stop the strikes. Whoever brought this war must take it back.
Now, amid President Trump's push for a rapid ceasefire, American officials also held separate talks with Russian delegation in Riyadh on Monday. Now, as the United States goes back and forth between the delegations, one can only hope talks in Saudi Arabia will pave the way for a breakthrough. And now moving to Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney has called a snap election after just 9 days in office. The country will head to the polls on April 28th as President Donald Trump wages a trade war and repeats his desire to make Canada the 51st state of the United States. Key candidates like Carney and conservative leader Pierre Poilievre have vowed retaliation against President Trump's threats, and Canadians want a leader that will protect their sovereignty from an unpredictable neighbor. Here's our report with more.
Less than 10 days after taking office, Canada's new Prime Minister Mark Carney has called a snap election, sending the country to polls on April 28th. The 5-week poll campaign has now begun to ultimately decide Canada's political and economic future. And while U.S. President Donald Trump won't be on a ballot in Canada, he's all set to show up as the top electoral issue this year. For key contestants like Carney and Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, it's the battle of how they propose to deal with Trump. And for the voters, it's about who's the most capable candidate to handle their most unpredictable neighbor.
I've just requested that the Governor-General dissolve Parliament and call an election for April 28th. And she has agreed. We are facing the most significant crisis of our lifetimes because of President Trump's unjustified trade actions and his threats to our sovereignty. Our response must be to build a strong economy and a more secure Canada. President Trump claims that Canada isn't a real country. He wants to break us so America can own us. We will not let that happen. We're over the shock of the betrayal, but we should never forget the lessons. We have to look out for ourselves. We have to look out for each other.
Yes, the Prime Minister is absolutely right. Canada is under threat from its most trusted ally. And for the first time in years, the general election is more about Canada's sovereignty rather than domestic issues. Since returning to the White House, Trump has accused Canada of doing nothing to stop the flow of illegal migrants and drugs into the United States. He placed 25% tariffs on Canadian goods on March 2nd before pausing them for a month. And on March 12th, the Trump administration imposed a 25% duty on aluminum and steel, hitting Canadian imports hard and sparking a trade war. In retaliation, Ottawa slapped tariffs on about $42 billion worth of American products. But economic force is not the only weapon Trump has used to intimidate Canadians. The U.S. president keeps saying he wants to annex Canada and include it as the 51st state of the United States. A bitter taste of Trump has inspired newfound patriotism among Canadians who now want their next leader to respond firmly to his threats.
If I had to talk to Donald Trump, I would say, drop the tariffs. Canada is your friend. We're your ally. We don't want to be fighting you guys, but we're going to do what we have to do if you keep threatening our sovereignty.
Not for sale. It's simple as that. We have our own country, we have our own pride. We're not to be annexed. You know, you're either our neighbor or you're not anything with us. We're our own country.
While the newest Prime Minister Carney has promised further vengeance, Conservative leader Poilievre has vowed to convert anger and anxiety among Canadians into action against Americans.
Stand up and say, we are not Americans, we are Canadians!
Here, for 3 terms, they provided weak and out-of-touch leadership. 3 terms, they drove up costs and crime. 3 terms, they sent our jobs south and pushed our economy under the American thumb.
Fueled by anger against former Liberal Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Poilievre's party had been leading in opinion polls since mid-2023. However, recent polls suggest a stunning reversal, with the battle now being neck and neck. Meanwhile, 2 other major contestants, the National Democratic Party and the Bloc Québécois, have seen their popularity diminish. As Canada gears up for the much-anticipated election, only time will tell how Trump's interventions will reshape Canadian politics.
And from Canada, we now turn to President Trump's growing interest in another northern territory, Greenland. The icy, resource-rich island is once again at the center of a geopolitical storm as the high-profile U.S. delegation led by Second Lady Usha Vance, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and Energy Secretary Chris Wright land there this week. Now, according to the White House, the trip is meant to celebrate Greenlandic culture with stops at historical sites. But many, including Greenland's leaders, see it as something much more aggressive. Greenland's Prime Minister is slamming the visit and labeled it a provocation. Speaking to a Greenlandic newspaper, the Prime Minister added that the duo's visit will only increase pressure on President Trump's takeover mission.
The only purpose is to show a demonstration of power to us, and the signal is not to be misunderstood. He is Trump's confidential and closest advisor, and his presence in Greenland alone will certainly make the Americans believe in Trump's mission, and the pressure will increase after the visit.
Now, Greenland, a semi-autonomous Danish territory, has long been of strategic interest to the United States. Sitting along the shortest route between Europe and North America, the island is home to a crucial U.S. military base and holds vast stores of rare earth minerals, which are vital for modern technology and defense. And now, with Russia and China also eyeing the Arctic, the U.S. appears to be ramping up its presence as well.
But we've been dealing with Denmark, we've been dealing with Greenland, and we have to do it. We really need it for national security. I think that's why NATO might have to get involved in a way, because We really need Greenland for national security. It's very important. You know, we have a couple of bases on Greenland already, and we have quite a few soldiers, and maybe you'll see more and more soldiers go there.
Now, Second Lady Usha Vance and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz's visit come at a particularly delicate time. Greenland is currently in a caretaker period after an election earlier this month where the left-wing party was defeated. And Jan's Frederick Nielsen, the likely next leader, has already condemned the U.S. trip, calling it a lack of respect for Greenlandic sovereignty.
The fact that the Americans know very well that we are still in a negotiating situation and that the municipal elections have not yet concluded, they still capitalize on the moment to come to Greenland, once again, which shows a lack of respect for the Greenlandic population.
Meanwhile, on the ground, many locals remain deeply skeptical. In fact, a recent poll found that 85% of Greenlanders oppose becoming part of the United States, with nearly half seeing President Trump's ambitions as a direct threat. But despite this, the Trump administration is in fact pushing ahead. As the U.S. delegation touches down this week, all eyes are on just how far the pressure will in fact go. Will Greenland hold its ground, or will President Trump's persistence pay off? And today we end with the Starlink satellite network, which has become an important tool in global communications. But now a high-stakes deal between Italy and the satellite company has hit a roadblock. And it's not just about technology. In fact, politics is at the center of it all. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who shares a close friendship with Elon Musk, the company's founder, is facing intense opposition over the deal. With Musk's growing ties to President Donald Trump and his controversial stance on Ukraine, Italy is facing some very, very tough questions. Should it trust Musk with national security for one, or look for an alternative option? Here's our final story with more.
In today's world, where secure communications are more critical than ever, Italy is looking for a new system to protect its government, military, and diplomats. One major contender for this is tech billionaire Elon Musk's Starlink. But negotiations between Italy's far-right government and Musk's SpaceX have suddenly come to a halt, and the reason is less technical and more political. Talks about a possible $1.6 billion deal have been overshadowed by Musk's controversial role in geopolitics. His close ties to U.S. President Donald Trump and his statements on Ukraine have fueled concerns, forcing Rome to reconsider this deal with SpaceX. Over the weekend, Italy's Defense Minister Guido Crosetto confirmed that all discussions with Starlink are at a standstill. He said it was partly due to the fact that discussions have moved from technical aspects to statements by and about Musk. Now, Rome wants a secure and encrypted communication system for its military and diplomats in high-risk areas. Starlink, with its 7,000 active low-orbit satellites, is a leading option. But should Italy trust Musk with national security? That's the question being asked by Italian opposition parties. Many argue that handing such a sensitive contract to a foreign businessman closely linked to Trump could be risky. This has put Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni in a tough spot. She's looking to strengthen Italy's alliance with the US, while standing firm with European partners. Trump's divisive stance in global politics has made this balancing act a difficult one for her. And here's the thing, this is not just an Italy problem. The stall in talks is just another headache for Musk, who's already facing a major backlash in the US over his politics and closeness to Trump. It's not just his reputation that's taking a hit, his companies are feeling the heat too. Tesla is in crisis. Sales are down, especially in Europe. Its stock prices slumped earlier this month, and analysts as well as investors say Musk's political leanings are driving customers away. Protests have also rocked Musk's SpaceX. So what happens next? Some argue that Italy and Europe should develop their own satellite communication system instead of relying on Starlink. But experts say that could take years, and in the short term, Starlink might be the most viable option for them. For now, negotiations are frozen. Italy says talks could resume when the political tensions calm down. However, the question remains, is Elon Musk's growing political influence starting to cost him major deals.
That's all we have time for today. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you right back here tomorrow.